Hello, this is Thomas Cobbs Jr. here with Ken 516 with my Cap 2, Fate of Lactate. Starting off, we'll be talking about what lactate is. It is a byproduct that is produced naturally through a process that we'll be talking about a little bit later through metabolism and exercise. It is a source of energy that becomes more precious as exercise intensity increases and is an organic molecule that can be found in all living uh, uh, creatures. Next, we'll be talking about the Cori cycle. So the Cori cycle is the process of which uh, lactate is removed from the muscle and turned into glycogen to replace the glycogen reserves in the aerobic activity. Lactate is then formed in the active muscles and transported to the liver via the bloodstream and then turned into glucose. The Cori cycle stops lactate acidosis in skeletal muscle during anaerobic exercise to a certain degree, the threshold. I'll go into a little bit more depth about this in the next slide. So the steps of the Cori cycle. I have a similar image on the right as I did in the last slide. So the first step is the anaerobic glycolysis. This is the conversion of glucose to lactate or lactic acid. This happens in the skeletal muscle, which is then diffused from muscle cells into the bloodstream and then transported to the liver. The lactate then turns to pyruvic acid, which then gets turned into glucose again, which gets transported to the bloodstream, and also the cycle just repeats itself. All this happens simultaneously, and again, this happens during anaerobic exercise. Effects of exercise intensity and training adaptations. So when exercise intensity increases, we get what's called lactate accumulation, which is just a buildup of lactate in the skeletal muscle, which can result in decrease in performance, which I'll get into a later slide. During exercise, intense exercise, less oxygen is in the blood in the skeletal muscles, and this will result in what's called the anaerobic or lactic threshold. Lactic acid accumulates in the blood, and that can cause fatigue. So a lot of people use that as referring to hitting the wall or you're just gassed out. I have a lot of experience with this. I train in martial arts and boxing, and just anyone with any sport really. I'm sure they've all experienced this. Long distance runners, when you have that high intensity, there will be a point where you can't maintain that for a long amount of time. So this is where we get that lactic threshold. Endurance training enhances density of capillaries and stores of mitochondria that increase cell capillarity that make ATP. So in saying that, endurance training does increase your ability to prolong fatigue and makes you be able to not hit the wall for long amounts of time. So hitting the wall can be delayed. The training modalities do have to be appropriate though. I'll talk about the difference between lactic acid and lactate. This is something that I thought was very informational reading, going over this cap, as I didn't really understand the difference myself. So essentially, lactic acid is an acid produced during anaerobic glycolysis that in the body quickly dissociates to release a hydrogen ion. The resulting compound produces the acid salt called lactate. So essentially, no lactate is formed in any living system. Lactic acid, it's gone so quickly that we don't even use it. We use that lactate. We do use lactic acid, but the main product that we use is the lactate. Lactate is fuel. So how much lactate is used is dependent on the rate of exercise intensity, blood flow, metabolism of lactate concentration, hydrogen ion concentration, and fiber type. Lactate is an aerobic metabolite when glucose or glycogen is a fuel source and sufficient oxygen is available. When there is high availability of lactate during exercise, it may be used as a substitute fuel source for the heart, lowering the need for glucose. This is a very interesting fact because our heart it's probably the hardest working muscle in our body, pumping blood and making sure everything goes where it needs to go. So lactate is very important, not just for our skeletal muscle, but also for the heart. As exercise intensity increases, lactate becomes the favorite fuel source for cardiac muscles, where it is oxidized to CO2 in the mitochondrium. Lactate accumulation. So lactate builds during high intensity when the body's energy needs surpasses the oxygen supply. So very high intensity, you're about to hit the wall. The harder the muscles work, the more acidic they become, which leads to decreased performance. So when you feel that burning sensation, especially during high repetition exercises, especially squat jumps, multiple sprints, this is what it's referring to. If lactate accumulation is unable to continue, the lactic threshold is met, which is also known as the onset of blood lactate accumulation, OBLA or OBLA. When lactate concentration rises to 4 millimoles. These are my references, and thank you very much.